the topic of this workshop, as you can see, is resilient GIS education. And I'm very happy to be moderating this, Michael Gould, along with three panelists. So we'll be hearing from Kate Parks and from Justine Blandford and from Forrest Bullock in turn, and they'll give sort of their 5 or 10 minute sort of overview of things they've been thinking about. And then we can sort of turn to the Jamboard and have a look at how that's developing and talk about some people's comments. And that's usually how it works out pretty well. We comment on the comments and we ask people, oh, okay, that's an interesting topic up there in the technology section. Who added that one, and why do you think that that's important? Of course, these are anonymous. So if if you feel sensitive about a particular topic, don't feel like you have to claim them. It's nice for us to see that someone thinks it's an interesting topic. It doesn't have to be necessarily attached to people's names. So a little bit of context. Of course, we're all interested in the topic of resilience in GIS education because of the COVID crisis. But other things have happened in the past which have forced us to sort of radically change the way that we do things, sort of disruptions. And of course, this is the latest disruption that's affected most of us around the world. Starting last year, starting in 2020, a group of academics led by Karen Kemp and people from various continents got together and created these global GI science education conversations, these panel sessions. So Justine, if you could add this link to the, yeah, she's got it. Add that link to the chat window. There you can link to this website, which has a series of panel sessions that have taken place in the Americas, in Asia Pacific, and in Europe, Africa over these past months. And we've had really interesting conversations, much like the conversation that we're having today in this workshop. And there you can get access to the results of their various panel sessions, and you can see how perhaps things are different between the different continents or different regions, and things that people have been concerned about and things that people have proposed as possible solutions. So in that context, we have been holding these sorts of panel sessions or workshops in other places. So just a few weeks ago, we had a similar workshop. It wasn't a 45-minute workshop, it was a 3-hour workshop, much more in detail. And that was at the Agile Conference, the Association of Geographic Information Laboratories in Europe, their annual conference, which was a virtual conference, but organized out of Crete. And if you could paste that in, Justine, people can have a link to some of the results of that workshop. And you can see there that we used the Jamboard for the first time, and it was pretty productive. So we thought we'd try that again here. So that's setting a little bit of context. The fact that we've all been affected in one way or the other to one degree or another by COVID-19 imposed changes, disruptions, etc., in the way that we teach. And this affects, of course, not only educators or instructors, but also the students and also administrators. So we've had conversations with people at all different levels, and we probably have a bit of a selection of these people as well connected today. So without any further ado, I'd like to move on to our panelists, and let's have a few minutes. Kate is the first, so just as a quick introduction, or she can probably do a better job. But anyway, Dr. Kate Parks is a principal teaching fellow in GIS, and she's at the School of Geography and Environmental Science at the University of Southampton in the UK. And these are a couple of ideas here, sort of as a background graphic, while Kate tells us a little bit about her story. So the microphone is yours, Kate.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. I've been to the Esri Education Summit before, but never spoken, so it's really nice to be involved this way. So thank you for having me. So I was involved in a couple of the conversations that Michael mentioned earlier, and this is sort of building on some of the points from that. And having been through over a year now of having to deliver GIS teaching in a pandemic, what can we take from that in terms of going forwards? My first point sort of puts my environmental science hat on as well, in terms of thinking about all the teaching materials that I've had to develop this year, and how can I move those, use those going forwards. And so by reduce, reuse and recycle, what I mean by that is one of the big bits of feedback we've had from students, certainly within the University of Southampton, I'd say it's fairly prevalent, and from talking to colleagues, I think elsewhere as well, the need to reduce the amount of content that we're giving them. And I think that picks up on students' resilience as well as staff's resilience. We've sort of almost been overcompensating for not having in-person sessions by throwing all this stuff at them. So the first thing I'm going to do taking forwards is reduce the amount of content I give them. And then the next two are about me being efficient, and I want to reuse and recycle what I've developed this year. So reusing if something is appropriate, you know, it's only a year old, so hopefully it will still be up to date and relevant. I will reuse it. If I think I mentioned in a pre-meeting with Michael and Justine and Forrest, I tend to go off on tangents and be a bit flippant and comment on the weather or something. And so if I need to update it from that perspective, I want to be able to recycle my materials. So one of the things I learned early on was, rather than just record a standard lecture of me standing in front of a fake background or whatever, I edited videos in a piece of software called Camtasia, which means that if there's a small section I need to update, I can just take that bit out and plop a new bit in. So I'm hoping I've done the lion's share of the work in terms of developing, and now it will be a case of just updating smaller segments of my kind of bite-sized videos that I've put together. I mean, it was actually a really nice opportunity this year to do some video stuff that I've always had in my head, but I've never had the reason to actually do it. And it was a case of taking some of the key concepts and going back to basics. This was a point on one of the Jamboards from one of the sessions I saw, using pens and paper and acetate. I had to get permission to go into campus to get a box of acetate overlays that I could draw and then video, stacking them up to be the layers in a GIS. So I quite enjoyed putting the videos together, but I definitely want to make sure that I use them going forward. So I think that was my first point. My second point, relating to building student cohorts, I think that's been the biggest challenge in this whole pandemic, regardless of discipline, has been getting students to have a coherent community. And there's one module in particular I teach. It's kind of an intro GIS module for a master's at master's level, and it has students from about 4 or 5 different master's programs, ranging from sustainability through to energy engineering through to marine biology. So it's a real diverse cohort of students. And I think that was something that was lacking this year. So to build student resilience in, I think I need to work on getting that cohort feeling when we won't be 100% back in the classroom again. And so some ideas I had for that, I think I want to run, come September, we're going to be allowed to do some face-to-face in-person teaching, but not everything, simply because of a capacity issue on campus. And so rather than focusing on computer practicals being in the lab, I'm actually going to focus on more of the discussion sessions being in person, so that I can try and get students to know people not on their own MSc program, and try and break down those barriers. Because I think students supporting students is one of the best ways that they learn, both in terms of doing the supporting and being supported. And my final point, agility of GIS teaching in the context of a university. There are a couple of analogies I wanted to use. So I think a university, in terms of responding quickly to anything, tends to be like an oil tanker, and you can see the iceberg coming, but you can't necessarily steer to avoid it quickly enough because of administrative systems and that sort of thing. And certainly within our school in Southampton, we've been talking about this need to if we're going to be in and out a cycle of lockdowns, we need to be able to take advantage of windows of opportunity. How we do that when that requires a whole re-timetabling of a semester's worth of work within a few weeks, I don't know. But I think that's something that we need to consider, is making sure that we have this ability to flip to and from different modes of delivery without losing the benefits of in-person or face-to-face.
Thanks a lot, Kate. Now, this last part about flipping, is that easy for all instructors, or is that something that certain instructors do pretty well and others fight against?
Me? Or
yes, yeah.
me?
The last part
Yeah.
about flipping, right? It sounds easy, right? It sounds like something we should all do, but.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Colleagues and students, I think, want certainty. I think that's what everyone wants. And I think all of the complaints that we've had from students have essentially boiled down to, please make the pandemic go away, which we can't do. So trying to provide some form of certainty, I think, is beneficial. But I would try and have a series of activities that aren't necessarily temporally constrained within a course, that when you can do something, you can go, right, let's go and learn how to use a GPS and get it to talk to a GIS, but that's not necessarily part of the bigger course structure, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. In terms of colleagues, different people work differently, and yeah, herding cats sometimes springs to mind with different academics, but I think people are going to have to learn to be a bit more agile.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Let's move to our next panelist, who's Justine. Let's see if I can get that to come on the screen. Yes. So Justine Blandford is a professor of geohealth at the ITC, which is at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. Justine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. So I am new to ITC. I started there about a year ago, having moved from Penn State. So I moved during the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I taught predominantly in an online Masters of GIS. So for me, watching all this transition was very interesting, going from face-to-face to the online, and seeing what that means in terms of resiliency. So I've been part of the global conversations that have happened and organizing a lot of those. And I think one of the things that has come through was what resiliency is all about. Our ability to adapt, plan, prepare, recover, and just deal with disturbance of activities. If anyone here who has gone through this throughout this past year and a half, I think one of the key questions that you should be asking yourself is, were students able to learn throughout this process? And if so, it's probably because you as the instructor played a very big role in making, that smooth transition. We saw it here at ITC. We ran a survey, and it was actually quite rewarding to see the amount of new things that have happened during that time period, and the adaptation that took place, and the time spent on learning new methods, approaches, and technologies to help in making that a smooth transition for many students. I think one of the biggest challenges has been developing community in the classroom. Obviously, in a face-to-face environment, that happens very naturally by just being in the classroom. In an online environment, that is very different. You have to put in these spaces for those interactions, and those interactions between other students and between students and faculty, as well as between different faculties. And I think that is still a big challenge today as we move forward. It's just figuring out how to make that balance work depending on what your class is. Factoring in time for planning, creativity, and innovation. Again, building on some of the things that Kate highlighted with, the trying out those new things, taking the time to make media so that you can use it in your classroom. I mean, that takes a lot of time and learning to be creative, to think through what that process is and think through what those end goals are and how you can reuse it. And this also came through with a lot of the conversations, both in the global conversations and in the Agile workshop, that time to be creative so that we can plan things. And it's part of the whole resilience thing, so that you can adapt moving forward. The last point that I included was motivation. This is something that came through quite strongly from the Agile workshop, where everybody is tired. They want the pandemic to end. So how do we keep students engaged and motivated throughout this next phase, and also staff, because everybody's burnt out by this stage. So how do we keep that motivation going? So that we can continue to be creative and innovate as we move forward, particularly now as we have to think through what the education is going to be moving forward. Are we going back to face-to-face, or are we going to have hybrid systems as we move to the next phase?
Thanks a lot, Justine. Thinking about that community aspect amongst the students, perhaps people can think about and maybe add a few post-its regarding the nature or the extent to which students help each other out in a GIS lab. Yeah, are we losing that when we go virtual? Is it something which you do, which you agree that is part of the GIS class? I would certainly observe that when we look at our industrial users from Esri, people don't just wake up in the morning and say, I think I'll do GIS, right? GIS is a team sport, right? I mean, there's a GIS, team, group, department, et cetera, and it's sort of, multi-participant, multi-stakeholder, et cetera. And so something for us to think about whether, we're able to preserve that online or whether it needs to have people sitting in a classroom. It strikes me, Justine, that also you've got the survey from the Agile conference. Did you want to have people take a look at that survey now? Because we'd like to get people's opinions today as well. Do you want to run people through those questions, or is it something that people can do on their own?
I think they can do it on their own. I've posted the link into the chat.
Okay, I'm forgetting how long that is. How many questions?
I think it's only about 10. They're very simple, straightforward questions, so they shouldn't take too much time.
Should we do those now?
Yep.
I think we should, yeah, because otherwise we'll get confused with other things, the Jamboard, and then there's a survey regarding this workshop at the end and all that. So let's not have too many things going on at once. So if you would be willing to fill out that would be excellent.
Yeah. And Karen has posted in the chat to repost the Jamboard link for anyone who arrived late. I've just done that.
Super. Yeah, in fact, you can maybe repost everything. One of the strange things about Zoom is if you show up late, you miss the early part of the chat. I appreciate that. So how many minutes do you think we need for that?
I think we can continue if you want. I've posted everything in. People are posting to the Jamboard. Yeah.
Just wanted to give people enough time to go through that survey if they're interested in it. I mean, you can follow up and continue, complete the survey later on. But anyway, that would be very valuable for us to add your data. Always nice to have a nice big in. So I think what we'll do while we're finishing that up is I'll pass to the next slide, and we'll at least introduce our next speaker, who is Forrest Bullock, lecturer at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is my alma mater. And also Marco Peña's on the call. He studied at UMass. So there you go. UMass. Yes. So, and he's at the Geography, Geoscience, and Environmental Conservation Department. So I think you can take it away, Forrest.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the introduction. So my name's Forrest. I've got a lot of different affiliations at UMass. In addition, I run and manage a one-year MS Geography GIST program for students looking for a really direct GIS graduate experience. And in this, I was kind of expecting everyone to disappear after the pandemic hit and we moved to remote teaching, but we had our biggest cohort ever. So it was very interesting to see them connect, and certainly all the topics and all the questions that Kate and Justine brought up, very much agreeing with and connecting with. I had a couple of other bullet points, a couple other areas that I wanted to hit, and that I think are, none of this is disappearing, right? We all want to say that things are back to normal, and I've been really pushing against that terminology. We are going into a new phase, a new mode, a after pandemic, or maybe like pandemic phase, whatever phase we're in, 5, 6, open, shut, whatever it is. But one of the things that immediately was of concern to me, and was immediately, well, was worrisome anyway, but was even more worrisome at how difficult it was to address, was how all of this shift in terms of remote, in terms of technology access, just compounded accessibility concerns. So plenty of stories here in the US of students of all levels doing their homework from the car in the fast food parking lot, or trying to get dial-up modems to work so they can at least check their email, stuff like that. Internet connections, computers, difficult to access. Virtualization was my toughest thing last fall, of just trying to get students access to technology, getting students access to GIS. Some of that isn't, not having a computer base. Some of it is, I have the wrong computer to use this, to use ArcGIS, or to use the various GIS things we wanted to do. Creates another accessibility concern. That's not going away. If we're talking about shifting modes, hybrid, flipped classrooms, all this kind of stuff, we really have to make sure that everyone, all of our students and instructors, faculty, everybody has this type of, has stability, accessible computing, accessible internet, accessible resources, what they need to be able to get the work done, what they need to be able to teach and to learn and to research and to all this kind of stuff. And that, as brightly as these issues were revealed, they're not gonna, switch off, let's say. So if we're expecting multimodal, if we're expecting hybrid, whatever you want to call it, we need to think about ways that we can actually, support people. And I mean, infrastructure, digital infrastructure that's probably bigger than many of our pay grades, but we have to at least take it into account. I was so impressed by a student and one of my TAs, to the second bullet point, getting the work done. They came up with this incredible workaround where the student would get on Zoom with the TA for office hours. The TA would boot up a second computer, and they let the student remote control that computer so they could get the GIS done, because the student's computer didn't work, and yada, yada, yada. They get the work done. So we need to be as creative as our students are. And I learned a lot from my students in terms of how to get stuff, get connected, get work done. My MS GIST students created their own Discord. Discord is a wonderful little app for voice communication, text communication. You can stream stuff. It's like its own little world of communication. They made one, they talked, they got stuff done. Might have used Slack. I've used Slack in some of my classes. That helped with some of those, cutting down on emails, that, oh, where's that button again? Put that in the Slack. Students can help out. You can help them out. It makes sense. So creative. For a lot of people, just learning the course management system, it's Moodle for us, Blackboard, whatever it might be. Learning that is a lot. But trying new things, trying out new technologies, new ideas. Certainly think that there's a lot of great resources out there that put the work in, give it a chance to try. There's a lot in terms of technologies, in terms of ideas. We've talked about a flipped classroom. We've talked about some other educational methods and modes. There's a ton of great ideas out there. I've learned a lot from my wife, who teaches elementary and middle school. I use quiz games that she uses in my classroom. Guess what? The college students love a little competitive quiz as much as fourth graders do. There's all of these tips and tricks, and here's how to set up a discussion. Here's how to set up help documents that people are doing in other domains, in other departments, in other parts of the campus. They work in GIS just as well. It doesn't have to be a GIS specific thing for us to adapt. I've learned a lot in terms of, especially the flipped classroom that we've had a good discussion on. I've learned a lot from people who know nothing about GIS, but they know how to dig into a lesson, how to dig into an exercise. Some of the most challenging but most rewarding work I've done in terms of development was, sitting with someone and explaining okay, here's the lesson, here's what we do, here's what we share, here's what students submit, and just having them look back at me and say, why do they do that thing? I'm just going like, because it's what we do. Yeah, but what's the purpose of it? And digging into that. You don't need a learning support person to do that. It's great if you have one on your campus or where you're at to ask for help. Ask for help all the time. We tell our students to ask for help, right? So we should be asking for help when we don't know what's going on. There's all these great ideas and components out there. So to hit on just something Kate wrote down, talking about video editing, because it's something that I love to say, but I hadn't ever made that connection in the same context. Talk a lot about teaching the things that are timeless about GIS, right? The standards, the projections, coordinate systems, cartographic basics, that kind of stuff. But Kate was talking about the video editing to be timeless. Get rid of the weather references, get rid of the clock in the corner of the screen so that it feels more universally directed. I thought that was just a great connection. As we have all these recordings, we have all these things that we've made. Let's put them to work. Let's put them to use so that we can keep innovating and keep trying new things and keep checking stuff out. So I think those are the big things I wanted to hit, Mike.
Awesome. It occurs to me while you're talking about these best practices, I mean, it sounds like the students are the ones who are coming up with a lot of these best practices, and we're finally learning from them. They've been doing it all along amongst themselves, and we're finally sort of catching up.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have learned a lot in whether it's how to use these new platforms, how students are actually using them, putting them to work. Like I've used Slack generally, but not in like a specific teaching context before this. I learned a lot about what students want out of that type of interaction and how to best support them. I think it's about listening when students are like, oh, I'm using this cool thing, or I'm doing this connection. I worked with friends. I have a friend who's really into kind of cybersecurity stuff, and he was talking about this VM thing he really liked. I'm like, oh, I want to try that. Let's see if that's going to work for what I'm doing. It didn't, but I got to learn some stuff, and that's good. I think that's finding out what connects with the students, but not just in terms of technology, but just in terms of interactions, interrelations. In my Intro GIS class, we used a bunch of different breakout rooms so that students could choose how they wanted to go through the lab that day. You want me to do a little walkthrough? I'm here. You want someone to support like audio and video questions? Great. You just want to talk in the chat? Awesome. There's a room for that. So the flexibility is good and important as long as you pair it with, here's the work we're going to get done, and many different pathways to getting, completing the goals of the course. We shouldn't say there's only one way. You have to come to class, you have to do this, and you have 30 minutes for the quiz. And I don't like that. I never have liked it, and I don't like that anymore. My midterm's never going to have a clock on it anymore because it works so much better to take the clock off. But allowing students to come to these different ways to get the work done.
And it sounds like it means a lot of work for you to do it that way.
It isn't. It isn't. Adjusting is work, right? When someone says, you know, oh, I need to figure out how to connect this certain way, then there's a load there. But every time I've made the course more accessible, every time I've made things easier for students, it's a lift in that moment, but then it's easier the rest of the time I'm teaching it. So, you know, we talk about universal design as a way forward with this, you know, for people who have students who have various, let's say, accommodations, learning accommodations. You know, oh, I need double the time on the exam. Well, okay, now we have to find another room and more space for you to, okay, well, what if you just got rid of the time limits on the exam? Now everyone's got access to it. So it's a simple example, but it really helps.
Thanks. To all three of the panelists, have a look at the Jamboard and tell me if anything sort of pops out. Anything new that we haven't seen in previous Jamboards with previous groups? And I encourage everyone to continue contributing there, and also in the chat window. By the way, Alexa, have a look at the chat, which I don't have access to here while my PowerPoint is on. Let me know if there are any particular questions that you think are especially interesting, or if there's a sort of a critical mass of people talking about the same thing.
Yeah, hi, Michael. Kate Parks asked while Forrest was presenting, how much of the accessibility issues do you think were part of the learning curve, and how much do you think will be easier to deal with now? And then Rosanna Rivero asked, agreed, what assumptions can we make about it? Even basic internet accessibility or access to software? Can we even talk about it in the classroom setting?
Yeah, good one. Forrest?
I was just gonna write up a response to Rosanna's question, because I think that's a great question and gets to kind of some of these different, you know, just students who are coming to class. I stopped making any assumptions about, so talking about like technical knowledge and efficacy type stuff. I stopped making any assumptions a few years ago. Again, me learning and adapting, when suddenly in the first day of lab, I said, download the data and unzip it and we'll start up GIS. And we had to have a 15-minute talk about what unzipping means, right? That is something that I was just locked in on. Students know how to do this. And I was wrong. So now I've rewound and I've said, okay, I can't assume this knowledge. And I mean, file paths, this doesn't have a file path, right? And this is the primary computing I think many of my students at least are used to. So we talk about file paths and what they mean. We talk about what unzipping means. As a fundamental, I think it helps. I think it really helps when you reemphasize those things. And again, universal design. Everybody could use a refresher on file paths, especially when it comes to various, you know, strange GIS analyses and whatnot. How many files have you lost today? I have probably none today, but maybe a couple yesterday. So these kind of adjustments make the course more accessible, make it more universal, helps overall. You could say, oh, these students, they don't know how to unzip, you know, and make the student feel bad about it. But that's not going to help anybody. And then you're going to create a culture or an environment where people are like, oh, well, is this question about error 999999 stupid too? Maybe I won't ask that. So I don't assume anything.
That sounds like a different level of accessibility. So sort of the notion that there may be a need for prerequisites, right? I mean, to come into my GIS class, you have to know about basic computing. You have to know about file systems. You have to know about certain things. What about on the technology side? I see a few people have commented on the virtual machines and that sort of thing. Justine, maybe you can paste in that Esri blog that's in the collection of links. We have certainly at Esri gotten lots of requests, you know, help us out with this virtual machine stuff, and, you know, help us move to Amazon or whatever particular vendor. And it's been an issue. And of course, we have success stories. There are universities that have thousands of students doing it, and we have other universities that have had limited success. And I think part of it is based upon how much IT support you've got and how much you're using the GIS. I think if I were teaching biology and I wanted to include a little bit of GIS in my course, you know, it wouldn't be worth my while maybe to go through all of that, infrastructure. But if I'm teaching multiple GIS courses and I do want to have people, connecting from around the world, then I think about investing in that sort of cloud architecture solution. Comments on that? Anybody?
I just want to hop in and say that virtualization is so context and institution dependent that it's frustrating when that's a challenge for you in your institutional context to, be told that's the solution. So it's really, I think that, I don't know. I think that there need to be we have to think beyond just that in terms of ways forward.
I think that's fair. We'd certainly like to hear from all of you regarding how you'd like to move forward and how Esri can help, because we understand that there's probably going to be a hybrid there as well. Certain things you need to do on your own computer, certain things you may be able to do online. Kate, you had your hand up.
It was just to pick up on Forrest's point about varying institution to institution. So the reason I asked the question in the chat for Forrest was when we started in September, October last year, students were told to use our virtual learning environment, which is a cloud-based Windows system, but the spec wasn't high enough. And our IT department were brilliant. First of all, they upped the spec on the VLE. Sorry, there's a squirrel. He may bark again. I apologize. And then they enabled us to, I'm going to type. Oh, no, they enabled students to remote desktop to physical machines on campus. So that worked really, really well. And that learning curve has happened now. So they can hit the ground running. The issue was in my mind, was in the delay to getting it set up in the first place. But that wasn't the fault of the IT guys because they'd never done it before. So, it's, yeah.
So please type into the chat window. We'd like to hear from everyone. Is WebGIS a reality, or do you think it's a year away, 5 years away? How do people see that? Looks like it's moving forward, but I wonder what people's opinions are on that. The ability to just connect from any machine, from any place. It doesn't matter if you're a Linux user or a Mac user or whatever. You find internet connection somewhere, and then you use big servers to do your GIS. So we'd like to hear people's opinions on that. Anything else that pops out on the Jamboard regarding the challenges?
I think one of the ones that pops out is also how to organize groups, student groups for group interactions, because there seems to be problems with every class on that. There's some posts on there with the move to ArcGIS Pro and using WebGIS and persuading colleagues to do that. So building on what you just highlighted.
Okay, excellent. We're running a little bit shorter on time. Let's jump to the second page of the Jamboard, the second board, which is solutions. Let's hear people's ideas regarding things that have worked for you. And also, I think we're especially interested in hearing sort of what are sort of new things you've done, which you think you will never go back on. I think some of us have learned a few things, and even if we do go back to the classroom, we'll continue doing things the other way. So I'd like to hear some of your ideas there. And while we're doing that, Alexa, any other questions popped up?
Roderick Schubert asked, I started in the graphic design world as we were shifting to electronic publishing. Why not place a basic open computer science information course into your teaching methodology, such as computer crash course?
Sure, yeah. Gets back to what we mentioned earlier regarding prerequisites. I mean, are you expected as a GIS, a GIS 1 instructor, are you expected to teach basic computing and sort of how to configure your PC, or should people have basic computing knowledge and sort of basic hardware, software knowledge? Yeah, good question. I mean, these days it's easy to send people to online courses and say, you know, do this 5-hour course and then come back and we'll move on. In fact, we recommend that in the GIS world as well. I mean, send people off to take a course from the learnarcgis.com site or whatever if you don't want to have to deal with those basic topics yourself, and then have people come back, and then, you know, perhaps your specialty is transportation engineering or something, you know, have them learn the basic GIS online and then come back and move on and talk about whatever network analysis, that sort of thing. Other questions, Alexa? Or other replies to that, other responses?
None in direct to that prior question.
Mm-hmm. How about some solutions? Do people have some solutions here? Ideas?
Yes, it looks like Darren says ArcGIS Online and Pro has been a learning curve, even for a seasoned GIS specialist, but a fundamental in getting access to the web environment for sharing with college level GIS. Love Collector and Survey 123.
Yep, good to hear. Yeah, we certainly hope people move in that direction. We have a notion at Esri of the sort of the modern GIS, which is more than just making maps on a desktop, right? So Pro is the connected desktop, which allows you to more easily share data, publish data, discover data, and then of course connect to the mobile application. So we certainly love to see the students out in the field collecting their own data on mobile applications and sort of directly being in contact with each other via a multi-user geodatabase and building databases together. What's this? I changed my delivery of GIS instruction. It's a little bit small for me to read.
These are great. All of these comments are so great. One of the things that I haven't put on the Jamboard yet, but as a solution is, I think, sharing our, sharing labs, sharing resources, engaging more with, that establishing a culture of kind of, putting stuff out there and letting people use stuff. The Intro GIS course I teach at UMass is fully open source, and it's posted on our library page, and anyone who wants the whole class, and I mean the whole class, the labs, the data, the exams, the slides, all of it can have it. And I think we need a culture more supportive of sharing around that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that comment has emerged in several of these panel sessions or several of these conversations over the last months. My observation is that we talk about it year after year in various workshops and various fora, and then some people do it and a lot of people don't. And I wonder, is it because certain instructors feel like they're competing for students or for materials or for funding? What do people think about that? Let us hear about that in the chat. And perhaps that's part of the solution. It certainly was a proposed solution in some of our other meetings. Instructors should be working more together and publishing more open data, and that would hopefully make people more resilient in a case where suddenly the environment changes or they're forced to teach a new course, let's say. That can be stressful for people, and then be able to count on materials being openly available. So I think we're running about out of time, and I hope, Justine, could you paste in that final survey, which is an official survey regarding this workshop? I hope people have found it interesting. And as I explained at the beginning, this, although it was called a technical workshop, it's essentially more like a panel session and opportunity for people to exchange some ideas. So I hope you will respond to the survey in that light. I hope you weren't expecting to do anything hands-on in a real technical workshop. I'd like to thank again Kate and Justine and Forrest for their participation, and thanks to everybody for your ideas on the Jamboard and in the chat window. We are still here for another day and a half, so please complete the survey that was just pasted in, and please keep in touch. Don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it. And thanks for joining this workshop, and please enjoy the rest of the of the summit. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.